Bill again, as he finishes up chapter 4, once again setting back and reviewing what he's done up to this point. Remember, nobody's ever written a book like this before. And he probably once again says, in the doctor's opinion, I was able to show them what the problem is. In my story, referring to Bill's story, I was able to give them an example of a guy that had the problem. In chapter 2, I was able to show them the solution to that problem. The problem being powerless, the solution being power. And in chapter 2, we were able to see the power of the fellowship and the power of the vital spiritual experience. And he probably said in chapter 3, I was able to show them exactly what's going to happen to them if they don't have that vital spiritual experience and find that power, that because of the insanity, they'll sooner or later go back to drinking. And then in chapter 4, he probably says we were able to show them a power that they could come to terms with, they could begin to live with, that they could perhaps be able to make a decision about. And I imagine he says to himself at this point, I've given them about all the information they need to see the problem, see the solution, and accept the idea of that solution. And he said, now then I think what we need to do is tell them how to find that power. And it's not by accident the next chapter is entitled How It Works. How do you find that power? And at this particular point, Bill was having great difficulty. Remember, the fellowship had insisted on seeing everything he wrote. They would take these chapters as he would finish a chapter up. Copies would go to Akron, copies to the New York group, and by this time a little group had started up in Cleveland. And they were having their meetings basically on these chapters as Bill wrote them. And you know how we alcoholics are. And everybody got their licks in. You know, just damn near every word was dissected and studied and et cetera and et cetera. And they would force changes on Bill. And Bill was beginning to notice there was a definite separation between Akron and New York City as to the type of content they wanted in this book. The Akron people wanted a book basically about God. Dr. Bob was a highly spiritual man, used the Bible, insisted everybody he worked with use the Bible. And they wanted more discussion about God, and really they had no problem with some of the religious terms. The New York City people, they were an entirely different breed of cat. They wanted a book dealing with the mind itself and very little spirituality and no religion whatsoever. They were headed up by a guy called Jimmy the Atheist, Jimmy Burwell. And Joe and I have seen his picture. He's sitting there with an old long stem pipe sticking out of his mouth, a bowl of it in his hand. He's the most cold-eyed sucker I ever saw. Looks like an atheist ought to look.
His eyes are real close together.
Jimmy and his bunch, they were saying, get all that God stuff out of here. We don't need that in there at all. Another thing that Bill had begun to have difficulties with from the very beginning, we had all different kinds of religions coming into AA. Some of the people that came in were Protestant, some were Catholic, some were Jewish. They were beginning to get a sprinkling of Muslims in. Now, how in the hell are you going to write something about God and satisfy all these people? They had taken the little Oxford group tenets, they had made 6 steps out of them. And Bill would look at those 6 steps and he could see there was loopholes there for the alcoholic mind to slip through. And he began to believe that those steps needed to be expanded. He didn't know how far, but he knew there needed to be some more steps in there. So all of this together gave him great confusion. And he said he tried and he tried and he tried and he tried to get started on chapter 5 and could not start. And he said one night while in bed, leaning against the headboard, pillow behind his back, pad and pencil in hand, he said, I finally just gave up. And said, I put the pad and pencil down and I asked God for guidance and prayed a little bit. And he said, then I meditated for 10 or 15 minutes. And he said, I then picked up the pad and pencil, and it felt as if the pencil had a mind of its own as it raced across the pages. In about 20 minutes, he wrote How It Works. One of the greatest pieces of spiritual information we've ever seen. Now, after he wrote How It Works, he went back and numbered these steps. And he was amazed to find there was 12. He didn't set out to write 12, he ended up with 12. And people would ask him, is there any significance to the 12 steps? And he said, nah, maybe the 12 apostles or something like that, and he'd just kind of laugh it off. The other members got hold of the original How It Works, and that's when the crap hit the fan. They did not like the original How It Works, period. They didn't like 12 steps. You know how you'd feel. You left your group the other night and you had 12 steps. What if you went back next week and you had 24? Bill had doubled the damn steps on them. See?
Besides that, Moses only had 10, you know.
Moses only had 10 on his thing.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is read to you how it works as Bill wrote it that night. How it appeared in the original manuscript before the other group saw it and before they changed it. And if you'll go through this thing with us, I think you'll see there's several differences. And we'll ask Joe to read it, and maybe by pausing or changing the tone of his voice or something, he can really point out the differences. And I think you'll notice there's several. Joe?
Chapter 5, how it works. Remember back on page 45, it said the main object of this book is to enable me to find a power greater than myself, which would solve my problem. And this is now we're going to get down to it. Chapter 5, how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our directions. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a way of life which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. And if you've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then you are ready to follow directions. Yeah. At some of these, you may balk. You may think you can find an easier, softer way. We doubt if you can. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that you are dealing with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for you. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. You must find him now. Half measures will avail you nothing. You stand at the turning point. Throw yourself under his protection and care with complete abandon. Now we think you can take it. Here are the steps we took which are suggested as your program of recovery. 1, admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over the care and direction of God as we understood him.
And direction of God as we understood him. Remember that. We'll refer to that later on.
4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely willing that God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly, on our knees, ask him to remove our shortcomings, holding nothing back. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make complete amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our contact with God, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual experience, as a result of this course of action, we tried to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. Now you may exclaim, what an order, I can't go through with it. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We're not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic.
That's Dr. Silkworth's opinion, and some of it in Bill's story, some in chapter 2 and 3, but basically the doctor's opinion.
The chapter to the agnostic.
Which is chapter 4.
And our personal adventures before and after.
Bill's story and those stories in the back of the book.
Have been designed to sell you 3 pertinent ideas. Remember, Bill was a salesman and a promoter. A, that you are alcoholic and cannot manage your own life.
Step 1.
B, that probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism.
Step 2.
C, that God can and will.
The last part of step 2.
Now, if you're not convinced on these vital issues, you ought to reread the book to this point or else throw it away.
I think it becomes very obvious of two factors here. Number 1, all the information that we need for steps 1 and 2 will be found in the doctor's opinion and the first 4 chapters. Now, later on, when they changed this, the book now says, being convinced, we're now at step 3. And I used to go back and read that, and I'd say, well, where in the hell did 1 and 2 go? Until one day we realized we've been working on 1 and 2, all the way through the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters. You really don't work 1 and 2. They are conclusions of the mind that we draw based upon the information presented to us in the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters. Now, this is what they used to do on the visit before the big book was ever written. You know, I've always been powerless over alcohol. My life's been unmanageable because of that from the time I ever took my first drink. I just did not know that, nor did I know why, until I read the doctor's opinion and the first 4 chapters. There's always been a power greater than I am that could restore me to sanity. I just did not believe he would do so, nor did I even understand what the insanity was that I needed to be restored from until I read the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters. Now that I've read that information, I have reached 2 conclusions. 1, I'm powerless over alcohol. My life's unmanageable. 2, I've come to believe there's a power greater than I am can restore me to sanity. Now, being convinced of those things, I'm now ready for step 3. So we can see where the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters fit in here in the exact sequence they need to fit into. I think the other thing that is so important is it's easy to see that Bill did not intend for this to be a set of suggestions. He intended for it to be a set of directions to the individual alcoholic on how to recover from alcoholism. And that's when the crap hit the fan, when the other members saw the word directions. They said, Bill, you can't give directions to alcoholics. They said, if you try it, they'll cut and run and go in the other direction every time. You're going to have to change that. And they said, Bill, where you keep saying you, and must, you got to soften that down. Nobody's going to buy into that stuff. And he said, well, you keep saying complete amends and all these. He said, that sounds too much like the Oxford Group Absolutes. You're going to have to do something about that. And Bill said, no, we're not. I'm not going to change these things. They said, well, you are going to change them. It's our book, not yours. He said, no, I'm not going to change them. He said, these words came after prayer and meditation. He said, these aren't my words, they're God's words. They said, we don't give a damn whose words they are. You're going to change them anyhow. And the fight was on. And it went on, and it went on, and it went on. And not only did they almost destroy the book project, they almost destroyed the whole fellowship over how it works. And finally, Bill recognized that he was going to have to compromise, or they would never get any further. And very reluctantly, he agreed to make some compromises. Now, a non-alcoholic psychiatrist who was around in those days made some suggestions. He said, why don't you change it from directions to suggestions, and it'll mean basically the same thing. You'll get your idea across, and probably more people could accept it. And he said, well, you keep saying you got to do that. He said, don't do that. He said, use the word we. Don't say you got to do this. Say this is what we had to do. And he said, well, you keep using the word must, change that to ought. And he said, I believe more people would use your book. And Bill very reluctantly agreed to those changes. Now, today we don't know. If they hadn't made those changes, instead of 2 million worldwide today, we might have 10 million. But also, if they hadn't made those changes, instead of 2 million worldwide, we might have 10,000. Who knows? Nobody knows. We just know this is the history behind this part of the book. But Bill himself was also cunning, baffling, and powerful. Because he said, okay, I'm going to compromise with you, but you're going to have to compromise with me. And they said, what do you want? He said, if I am to finish the book, you're going to have to give me the authority to do it. He said, I'm tired of fighting with you. I'm not going through this stuff anymore. If you want me to finish it, give me the authority. And if you don't want to give me the authority, then you finish it. Well, they didn't want to give him that authority, but they didn't want to finish the book either. And they very reluctantly agreed to that. Now, what Bill knew, but they didn't know, is 2 pages later, he's going to put directions right back in the book. And all the rest of the way through the book, you'll see directions and you and must. The only time you see the easier words is in the reading of how it works itself. And it ruined some of the continuity of the book when they took it out here, put it back there. It would have been a continual thing if they had left it like it was originally. Very interesting things went on in those days regarding the steps. But we can definitely see what Bill intended. Okay, let's say that you and I now have read and studied the doctor's opinion, the first 4 chapters. We've all agreed in our minds that we're powerless over alcohol. Our lives have become unmanageable. We've all come to believe that there's a power greater than ourselves that can restore us to sanity. And now then, the next thing we have to do is make a decision about that power. Are we going to let that power do that? or are we going to keep trying to run the show ourselves? We're now looking at step 3, Joe.
And the book says that being convinced of the first 2 steps, or the ABCs, or the doctor's opinion of the first 4 chapters, we were at step 3. We're not ready to take step 3 yet. We're just at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood Him. Well, just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? Well, that's a good question, isn't it? We're going to get a lot of instructions pretty soon, short instructions from Bill on just about how to do that. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a decision to turn our will. And what is our will? Our will is nothing more than our thinking, and our lives is our actions. So I'm going to make a decision to turn my will, which is my thinking, and my life, which is my actions, over to the care and direction of God as I understood Him. I'm getting ready to make that kind of decision.
I think we need to look at about 3 of those words very closely. The first one being the word decision. I hear people quite often today say, I've been in AA about 5 years. My life's still all screwed up, and I don't understand why. Because I turned it over to God 2 years ago when I took step 3. No, we don't turn it over to God in step 3. We make a decision to turn it over to God in step 3. And the word decision itself implies there's going to have to be some action taken to carry out that decision, just like Columbus. He made his decision standing on the shore of the ocean, but nothing happened until he took some action. An example of it in my own life, a few years ago, Barbara and I decided that we wanted to go to Los Angeles, California and visit some of our relatives. But we didn't do anything about that decision. So sure enough, we didn't get to California that year either. The second year in a row, we made the same decision. Second year in a row, we didn't do anything about it. And sure enough, we didn't get to California that year either. Third year in a row, we made the decision. Only this time it was a little different. This time I took the car down and had it serviced. Barbara packed some clothes and a little food. And we got in our car and we drove from our home to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Then we drove to Oklahoma City. Then we drove to Amarillo, Texas. Then we drove to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Then we drove to Flagstaff, Arizona. Then we drove to Barstow, California. Then we drove to San Bernardino, California. And then we drove to Los Angeles. And lo and behold, one day we ended up in their living room and we were visiting with our relatives. Not because we made a decision to do so, but because we took the action necessary to carry out that decision. Now, our book is going to tell us that step 3 will have no permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous course of action, which will be steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So step 3 is but a decision. Now, what is it we're deciding to do? Well, we're making a decision to turn our will over to the care and direction of God as we understand Him. Now, what is our will? Well, our will is nothing more than our thinking apparatus. Our will is nothing more than our mind. Our will is nothing more than this thing up here in our head that tells us what to do and what not to do. And by the way, as far as we know, we're the only species on earth that's ever faced with this decision. It seems as though the other species on earth, everything they do is on God's will or at God's direction. And there's really only 2 wills on earth. One is God's will, one is human will. And at any one given time, we human beings can make a decision as to whether we want to operate on God's will or whether we want to operate on self-will. And it seems as though we're the only species that's ever faced with this choice. Now, a good example of the use of the word will, tying it together with thinking. Let's say we're beginning to approach the end of our lives, and some of us are. And let's say we've collected a few material things, and we get concerned about what's going to happen to them when we pass on. We'll probably go down and sit down with an attorney, and we'll say, when I pass on, I want this to go to my spouse. I want my daughter to have this. I want my son to have this, and so on and so forth. Now, that attorney will take my thinking coming from my mind that day, put it down on a piece of paper. I'll sign it, and maybe the attorney will sign it as a witness, and he'll stick it in a safe, he or she, whichever the case might be. Now, 2 or 3 years from now, I kick the bucket. And if my family's like all the rest of them, they're going to call that undertaker, and they're going to say, come and get him, and let's get him out there at that cemetery as fast as we can. And they run me out to that cemetery, and they have a little service there, and they don't even wait till they cover me up. As soon as the service is over, they all jump in the car, and they go right back to that attorney's office. And that attorney gets out that piece of paper and reads to them what my thinking was when I was in that office 2 or 3 years prior to that time. Now, we know they call that piece of paper a will. It's not by accident. Will, thinking, mind are all synonymous. They mean the same thing. Now, we're making a decision to turn our will and what else over to the care and direction of God, as you understand Him? Our will and our life. Now, what is our life? Well, my life is nothing more than my actions. What I am today, right now, sitting behind this table, is the sum accumulative total of all the actions I've taken throughout my entire lifetime has made me what I am right now, this moment. All action is born in thought. All action is born in thought. It's not by accident this step says will and life. Many people read it backwards. They'll read it life and will. No, it's will and life. Now, if all action is born in thought, then it stands to reason that if my thinking is okay, chances are my actions are going to be okay. And chances are my life's going to be okay too. But if my thinking is lousy, then chances are my actions are going to be lousy. I have a lousy, screwed up life before I'm through with it. Now, I remember going to my sponsor and saying, I don't believe I can take step 3. He said, why? I said, because if I turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand Him, I have no idea what He would have me to be. And He may want me to be a missionary. And He may send me to China, and I sure as hell don't want to go there. And he just laughed. He said, well, at least it wouldn't be in the hands of an idiot, would it? He said, let's look back in your lifetime. He said, you've always been a selfish, self-centered, self-willed human being. You've never paid any attention to God's will, other people's will. You've always done what you wanted to do whenever you wanted to do it, and to hell with the rest of them. And he said, the end result of that is you damn near destroyed your life and also the lives of all those around you who care for you. He said, just think, Charlie, if God could direct your thinking, it probably would become better. And he said, if your thinking becomes better, then probably your decisions and your actions will become better. And he said, then probably your life and the life of all those around you who care for you might become better also. He said, Charlie, you're trying to find a way to live where you can be sober and peaceful and happy and free. And he said, left on self-will, you don't stand a chance. You'll keep doing the same old things you've always done. You'll remain restless, irritable, and discontented. You'll remain filled with shame, fear, guilt, and remorse. You'll keep hurting people. And he said, sooner or later, under those conditions, you're going to go back to drinking. He said, it's your decision to make. But without this decision, you don't stand a chance of long-time, happy sobriety. And he got through to me in such a manner that he convinced me I better do something about this self-will thing. Quit trying to run the show myself. Joe?
The book just told us how it works. Charlie just told us how it works. Now the book's going to tell us why it doesn't work and why it won't work. The next paragraph it says, the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. On that basis, we're almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good.
Okay, let's stop right there. And let's try to see why that a life run on self-will can hardly be a success. And let's try to see why, on that basis, we're always in collision with something or somebody. You know, about 12 years after Bill wrote the big book, he was prevailed upon to write another book. And this other book is called The 12 and 12. And there's always been a lot of question as to why Bill wrote The 12 and 12, probably several reasons. I think one reason he wrote it is simply because he'd had so much trouble selling the traditions to the fellowship that he felt if he could put the traditions together with the steps in the book, they would be more acceptable to the fellowship. That's one reason, I'm sure. But I think another reason he decided to write it is 12 years after writing the big book, Bill knew a lot more about human nature and about spirituality. You know, back when he wrote the big book, he'd only been sober about 3 years. Bill was not trained in spirituality and human nature. He was a night school lawyer. He studied economics and business. And he was not trained in those other areas. He did the best he could possibly do when he wrote the big book. In fact, I don't think he wrote it. I think God wrote it and used Bill's hands to write it. I just don't think Bill could have written a book like the big book on his own. But I also think at 13 years later, after having studied with, worked with some of the best minds in the world, Bill knew more about this stuff. And in the big book, he talked a little bit about the social instincts of life, but he knew very little about them. 12 years later, when he wrote the 12 and 12, on step 4, the first couple of pages, he taught me more about what makes me tick than I'd ever known in my life before. In just a few minutes of reading, I was able to see the thing that really gives me difficulties and the reason why I really need to try to do something about self-will. Now, we're going to borrow some of that information for just a few minutes And we're going to talk about these three basic instincts of life. And if we can see them and understand them and realize how they drive us and dominate us, then I think we can really begin to see the reason why we need to make this decision. And at the same time, we're going to see the information that's going to set us up for step 4. So we've got another little chart that we're going to put up here on the screen. And that little chart is called The Basic Instincts of Life Which Create Self. And this information came almost directly out of the 12 and 12. Bill says in the 12 and 12 that all human beings are born with certain basic instincts of life. They are God-given. They are absolutely necessary for survival of the human race. Therefore, they must be good things. He talked about the social instinct, the security instinct, and the sex instinct. And the first one we'll look at is the social instinct. And he said all human beings are born with a desire to be liked, to be accepted, to be respected, to come together in groups with other human beings. He said if we didn't have that desire, if we cared nothing about each other, period, there would be no society. And he said the world would go into a dog-eat-dog situation. Complete anarchy would reign. And sooner or later, under those conditions, the human race would simply fail to survive here on earth. And he used several terms under that social instinct. He uses the word companionship, and that's nothing more than wanting to belong or to be accepted. So many of us grew up on the outside of the crowd looking in, wanting to be a part of, knew we could not be. He uses the word prestige. And prestige is wanting to be recognized or to be accepted as the leader of the group. And the world needs leaders. Somebody's got to make decisions. I guess even back in the old caveman days, somebody said, John, get behind that tree with your spear. Jack, you get over here with your club, and Mary Ann and I'll run this sucker through here, and we'll jump it. Somebody has to do that. And usually a human being will take one of two directions. Either let me be a part of, or let me be the leader of. And in either case, it's based upon what other people think of us. If they like us and accept us and respect us, we can become those things. If they don't, we can't. Self-esteem is what we think of ourselves. And usually that's high or low based upon what other people think of us or what we think other people think of us. If it seems that they don't like us and accept us and respect us, we feel pretty low toward ourselves. If they seem to like us and accept us and bring us into the group, we feel pretty good toward ourselves. Pride. And oh, I'm glad I got to go into the dictionary and looking up words. I always thought pride is something you ought to have. All I ever wanted to be as a young boy growing up was a man who walked tall with pride and just a little bit sideways like John Wayne did. Until I went to the dictionary and looked that word up. And pride is defined as an excessive and unjustified opinion of oneself. We either think too well of ourselves or too low of ourselves, and in most cases it isn't true in the first place. Personal relationships is nothing more than our relationship with the world and the people in it. Ambitions are our plans for the future to gain recognition, prestige, power, acceptance, and etc. Those are all God-given things, and they're all good. Now, if you want to be liked and accepted and respected by the world and the people in it, the first thing you got to do is figure out, well, what is it they want from me? And usually as kids growing up, society teaches these things to us. One part of the world, it may be to have a large family. Another part of the world is to have a good education. Another part of the world is to be a large landowner. It can be any number of things, and it will vary in different parts of the world. Now, based upon what society teaches us, as kids growing up, we set goals for ourselves. This is where that great drive for success comes from, to be able to show those people that we're as good as they are, and so they will accept us. Now, if we're going to reach the goals that we set for ourselves, we're going to have to work at it. You can't just sit on your duff and be a bum and have everybody like you and accept you. And by the same token, you're probably going to have to make a few sacrifices. There are a few things that you and I would like to do as human beings that would be very pleasurable, but if we do them and they catch us, they're not going to like us at all. And I don't think you and I would do the work necessary to be accepted, nor make the sacrifices necessary to be accepted, if we didn't get some kind of reward for doing so. And that great reward is that when we get at the moment of successful completion of the goal. Bill said it in his story. He said, I had arrived. God, how many of us have done that? Set that goal and worked and strived for literally years. And the day we reach the goal, they pat us on the back and they say, Joe, you're a fine fellow, you're doing great. And there's a feeling comes over us, which is one of those indescribably wonderful feelings. And it is so great, we want more of that. We no sooner reach the goal and get the praise out of it, and we look around and we say, well, is this all there is to it? And we set another goal. And we work and we work and we strive and we strive and we sacrifice and we reach the new goal and we get the praise and the power and the prestige, but it doesn't last very long, and we set another goal. And it seems to create within we human beings an insatiable desire for more and more recognition, more and more acceptance, more and more power, so on and so forth. And we're not getting there fast enough. And they're not giving it to us the way we think they ought to, so we start taking a few shortcuts. We start lying. We start conning. We start manipulating people. We start stepping on their toes and climbing on their backs, and the instant we do so, we create pain and suffering for other people. They in turn retaliate against us and create pain and suffering for us. It's plain that a life run on self-will can hardly ever be a success, because under those conditions we're always in collision with people, places, and things. Second basic instinct he talked about is the security instinct. Now, I know in AA we live one day at a time as much as possible, but I also know just about everybody in here has got an insurance policy. And the purpose of that is to protect ourselves in the future. Bill tells us that all human beings are born with a desire to be secure in the future. He said if we were not concerned about the future, we wouldn't provide the food, the clothing, the shelter, the things that we have to have in order to survive. And next winter, we would just simply freeze to death. Next drought season, we would just starve to death. So this desire that you and I have to be secure in the future is a basic God-given thing necessary for our survival. Now, if you're going to be secure in the future, once again, you have to make a determination. Well, what is it that I need in order to be secure? And again, society teaches us that, and it will vary in different parts of the world. One part of the world, you need $4. Another part of the world, you need 4,000. Another part of the world, you need 4 million. Another part of the world, you need 172 coconuts. Whatever it is that they use to trade, measure, and barter with. Now, based upon what society teaches us, we set goals for ourselves. And if you're going to be secure in the future and reach your goal, you can't just sit on your duff and be a bum. You're going to have to work at it. You're going to have to save your money. You're going to have to invest it. At the same time, you're going to have to make some sacrifices. Hell, we can't blow it all today and have the new shoes or the new suit or the new car or the new this or the new that every time we want it and be secure in the future. And I don't think you and I would do the work necessary nor make the sacrifices necessary to be secure in the future if we didn't get a reward for doing that. And the great reward, once again, is that great feeling at the moment of successful completion of the goal. How many of us have set the goal for the new dress, for the new suit, for the new couch, for the new drapes, for the new car, for the new home, and we work and we work and we strive, and the day we reach the goal, my God, what a great feeling that is. Nobody can take it away from us. It's ours from this day forward. If it's a mortgage on the house, well, we might even call in the neighbors and we'll celebrate and we'll have a party and we'll burn the mortgage. It's such a great feeling. The only thing wrong with it, though, it's just temporary feeling. Hell, no sooner do I get my house paid for than I look around and her house is bigger than mine. Yeah, and he's got a Cadillac and I'm in a Chevrolet. And he's got a Brooks Brothers suit and I bought mine at Kmart. And that causes us to set another goal. And we work and we work and we strive and we reach the new goal, and it feels good, but it doesn't last long, and we set another goal. And it seems to create within we human beings an insatiable desire for more and more and more and more of these things, and our emotional security is based upon how fast we're getting them and how much we're getting them, etc. And they're not giving them to us fast enough, and we're not getting them the way we think we ought to, so we start taking shortcuts. We lie, we cheat, we con, we manipulate, we steal. And the instant we do so, we create pain and suffering for other people. They in turn retaliate against us and create pain and suffering for us. Plain that a life run on self-will can hardly ever be a success. Third basic instinct he talks about is the sex instinct. Now, I know in AA we talk about sex quite a bit. We laugh about it. We tell jokes about it. I doubt if any of us know a hell of a lot about it. But Bill said all human beings are born with a desire to have sex. Now, it may get turned off by bad teachings or bad happenings, but he said we're all born with a desire to have sex, because if we didn't have sex, we would not reproduce ourselves. And if we don't reproduce ourselves, then sure enough, the human race is going to fail to survive. Now, if you're going to reproduce yourself sexually, just like the other two basic instincts of life, you're going to have to work at it. You know, you can do more work in 3 minutes of sex, if you can last that long, than you'll do all day digging a ditch. Don't you older guys remember how it used to be when we got through with it? My God, you fall over sideways, the sweat's just pouring off of you. You can hardly get your breath. You feel like you've died, gone to heaven, and come back 2 or 3 times. And I don't think you and I would do that kind of work if we didn't get a reward for doing so.
He gets excited just talking about it, doesn't he?
And the reward we get is that great feeling, both physically and emotionally, At the moment of successful completion of the sex act, one of the greatest feelings a human being can experience, period. But also, just like the other two, it seems to be just a temporary feeling. Hell, you no sooner get through with doing it than you get to thinking about doing it again. And it's such an exciting and such a pleasurable thing that the next thing you know, we get to thinking about doing it in different ways. And then we get to thinking about doing it in different positions. And then we get to thinking about doing it with other people. And it seems to create within we human beings an insatiable desire for more and more and more, different ways and different times and different places with different people. And the next thing you know, we're doing it at the wrong time, in the wrong place, with the wrong people. And the instant we do so, we create pain and suffering for us. It's plain that a life run on self-will can hardly ever be a success. Under those conditions, we're always going to be in collision with people, places, and things. The very things that God gives us, which is necessary for our survival, are the very things that destroy us left on self-will. I like to call them the utilities of life. You know, this building we're in today, it's a beautiful building, great building for what we're doing here. And in this building, you have some utilities. You got water, you got electricity, you got some heat of some kind. Now, this building would be absolutely worthless without those three utilities. Yet I'll almost guarantee you, if this building is ever destroyed, it'll be because one of those utilities got out of control. And when they got out of control, they in turn destroyed the building. Life would be absolutely worthless without the three basic instincts of life. But the thing that destroys life will be when one or more of those basic instincts get out of control and left on self-will. The fulfillment is such a pleasurement thing, you simply can't keep from overdoing in those areas. You'll notice a little circle coming out of those called self. That's what creates self-will, are those three basic instincts of life. You'll notice coming out of that circle another one called wrongs. That's another word you got to look at. Somewhere in AA, we got the idea that when you see the word wrongs, we're talking about a list of dirty, filthy, nasty things. But if you go to the dictionary and look that word up, you find lots of definitions. One definition of the word wrong is incorrect judgment of others. A little later on, we're going to find out that's exactly what a resentment is. Another definition of the word wrong is incorrect believing. We're going to find out a little later on that's what most of our fears are. Another definition of the word wrong are the harms and hurts that we do to other people. A little later on, we're going to find out that's one of our greatest problems, is hurting people and then have to suffer the fear and the guilt and the remorse associated with those things. You know, it's very easy to spot a selfish, self-centered human being. They will always display three common manifestations. A selfish, self-centered human being is always madder than hell. Damn him and damn them, and by God, I'll show them, and they're not going to treat me that way, and blah, 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 blah. A selfish, self-centered human being is scared to death. Can't depend on God. Can't depend on others. And if you're an alcoholic and you're reaching the end of the road, you can't depend on yourself any longer, and you've got to be running absolutely scared to death. A selfish, self-centered human being left on self will always overdo in these three areas, always hurt other people, and have the fear of what they're going to do when they find out. And if they don't find out, if God dwells within each of us, we know the difference between right and wrong, and guilt and remorse begins to eat us up. All selfish, self-centered people are blocked off from any possibility of peace of mind by these three common manifestations: resentment, fear, and the guilt and remorse associated with the people we've hurt, and we don't feel good. Now, if we could get off of self-will and operate on God's will, we could still fulfill these three basic instincts of life, but at the level that God intended, and then we wouldn't be in conflict with other people. If all human beings on earth today could fulfill these three basic instincts at the level God intends, there would be no conflict in the world today. But all human beings have self-will. All human beings overdo in these three areas from time to time. All human beings are in conflict with other people, with themselves, because of the three basic instincts of life. Every emotional problem that a human being can have can be traced right back to one of those three basic instincts of life. They got a guy out here in prison. Now, they put him in prison for stealing. But why did he steal in the first place? Did he steal to build his social instinct? Did he steal for companionship purposes? Did he steal to build his self-esteem? Did he steal to be able to use that money for sex purposes? Just why did he steal? Invariably, every emotional problem that a human being has can be traced back to one of those three basic. I learned more about me right there in about 30 minutes of reading than I had learned in 40 years of living. And if you've never read about these basic instincts of life, please go read about them in the 12 and 12. See what he says about them, and they'll show us what creates self-will and how that actually blocks us off. not only from God, but from other people also, and destroys any chance for peace of mind, serenity, and happiness.
These basic instincts of life, if the sole satisfaction of my life is just to satisfy my basic instincts, then I'm going to be unhappy all the time. I think that for me, I need to be involved in something greater than I am in order to be happy. It seems like that seems to be the verdict of the ages. But this basic instincts of life, I think, is extremely, extremely important information. That's why we go through it. In order to do the fourth step, as the big book lays out, we need to have a working knowledge of this information, and Bill expanded on that information for us in the 12 and 12. And all the people that I work with, I ask them to go to the 12 and 12 and to get a working knowledge of these words and these ideas about the basic instincts and see how they are God-given and therefore good, not to be overused or underused. And then whenever they get into the four-step area, rather than doing those dirty, filthy, rotten things that some of us used to think we had to do in order to do a good four-step, they can look at the four-step properly in the proper way when we get into the four-step area in a little bit. So he said most people try to live by self-propulsion. That's on page 60 again. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show. He's forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would mind. No, if only people would do as he wished. That's the trouble with it. That's the trouble with self-will. Everybody's got one. All of us are trying to exercise our own self-will. If only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may be sometimes quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he is more likely to have varied traits.
I never understood what Bill was talking about in this last paragraph that Joe just read until I understood these basic instincts of life. And all human beings, as we grow up, based upon what society teaches us, we draw a little script up here in our head for what we're going to be. We're going to be a doctor. We're going to be a lawyer. We're going to be this. We're going to be that. And in drawing that script, we are like the actor who wants to run the whole show. We determine what it is that we need to do, when we need to do it, and so on and so forth, in order to be successful and get the praise and the prestige that we want. Now, not only did I draw a little script in my head for me, I drew one in my head for my wife also. Now she's going to be this, and she's going to do that, and she'll be this, and my God, it's going to work out, and life's going to be great. I also drew one in my head for my children. Now they'll have to become this, and they'll have to do that, and they'll be this, and God, it's going to be great. I drew one in my head for my co-workers on the job. They'll do this, I'll do that, man, it's going to work out good. Now the only problem is I didn't know that they had a script in their head too, and their script doesn't match mine. And instantly my wife and I were in conflict. She didn't want to do what I thought she ought to do. Now, rather than back off and say, okay, be what you need to be, all I did was exert more pressure on my wife, on my children, on my co-workers, and everybody around me to be sure that this thing worked out the way I wanted it to work out. Now, that's a natural thing that we do based upon the basic instincts of life. Never realized that's what I was doing until I read about these things. What usually happens under these conditions?
Well, the show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think that life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself more. He becomes, on the next occasion, still more demanding or gracious as the case may be. Still the play does not suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he is sure that other people are more to blame. He becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is his basic trouble? Is he not really a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages well? Is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things he wants? And do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Is he not even in his best moments a producer of confusion rather than harmony? So our actor is self-centered, egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. He is like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter complaining of the sad state of the nation, the minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century, politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave. They would only mind. That's the problem. The outlaw safecracker who thinks society would have wronged him, and the alcoholic who has lost all and is locked up. Whatever our protestations are, aren't most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, and our self-pity. Selfishness and self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past, We have made decisions based on self, which later put us in a position to be hurt.
Would you read that last statement again?
Yeah. But we invariably find that at some time in the past, we have made decisions based on self, which later put us in a position to be hurt. I made a lot of decisions based upon the satisfaction of these basic instincts, which later put me in a position to be hurt. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us, and God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without His aid. Many of us have had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them, even though we would like to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help.
I think one of the greatest mistakes going on in AA today, I see people trying to make themselves into better people without God's help. And self-will cannot overcome self-will. The satisfaction of these basic instincts of life is so strong that left on self-will, we will always overdo in those areas. Sooner or later, just like we'll always go back to drinking. And it seems the only way we can overcome these basic instincts of life, the overdoing in those areas, is with God's help. God made self-will, and only God has the power to change or overcome anything He's made. Self-will cannot overcome self-will. You can't heal a sick mind with a sick mind. We've got to have the help of a power greater than we are.
You know, I've always looked for the easier, softer way, and there it is. Let God do it. I don't have to do it anymore, you see. Well, this is the how and why of it. So now He's going to, He told us how it works. Now He tells us why it won't work. And now He's going to tell us how it really works. And He said, first of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work.
If this is a God-directed world, and I'm pretty sure it is, then those of us who have been self-directed, and not only did we direct ourselves, but we tried to direct everything and everybody around us. We've been trying to do God's business for Him. We're not God. We've just been playing at being God, trying to do God's business. First thing we got to do is quit playing God. Quit being self-directed. Quit trying to direct everything and everybody around us, and then maybe we stand a chance.
And after we get that done, it says next. We decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director.
Not our suggester, our director. He's got His word right back in now, 2 pages later, see?
Now, He is the principal, and we are the agents. He is the Father, and we are His children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we passed to freedom. You know, I got a friend back home, and I like to listen to him talk in AA because he says he's always asking God to get him this, to get him a job, to get him a car, to get my wife back, go take care of this, do this for me, and do that for me, and all that stuff, you know. And he doesn't know that, that God don't do those things, but he thinks He does. And I told him one time, I said, there's a story in that other big book, that other big book. And in front of that book, there's a story in there about God that He worked for 6 days and then He rested. And to my knowledge, He never did go back to work anymore. It looks to me like if there's going to be any work being done around here, it's going to be me doing all the work. See, He is the Father and we are the children. He is the principal, we are the agents. He's the boss, I work for Him. Most good ideas are simple. And He said this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch to which we passed to freedom.
Now here we're referring again to this wonderfully effective spiritual structure, the personality change sufficient to recover. Step 1, willingness, was the foundation of it. Step 2, believing, was the cornerstone of it. Now He tells us what it is. It's an arch. And we're going to pass through that arch to freedom. And the keystone in this arch, as the stone sets up in the top of the arch, it used to, before they used any mortar of any kind, those stones were all put together dry. And they were cut in such a manner that they leaned toward the center. And the keystone in the arch was cut in a certain manner, and all the other stones leaned against it, and that held the whole arch up. If it was good, the arch would stand up. If it was faulty, it fell out. The keystone of mine and your personality change, our new and triumphant arch, is a simple little idea. Those of us who have been self-directed all of our lives have now made a decision to let God be the director of our lives. Most good ideas are simple. And this is the simplest idea I can think of. Now, if I don't think I ought to do this, all I need to do is look back and see what I did with it. Self-will is what put me in AA. Self-will is what created all my problems. Self-will damn near destroyed me. Now I'm going to make a decision to let God direct my will rather than Charlie direct it.
On page 63 it says, when we sincerely took such a position, the one that was just described, All sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all-powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, we discovered we could face life successfully, and we became conscious of his presence. We began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. You know, and I told you, I think last night or this morning, they used to come to my house and talk to me about being reborn, and I'd run them off, those people from that church. And I'd say, get out of my house and get out of my yard and don't ever come back, you so-and-sos, and send them down their way. And I didn't understand about this idea about being reborn any more than this other guy that I read about after I got sober, and his name was Nicodemus. He didn't know anything about it either. And he went to this guy who was talking about being reborn, and he said to him, what do you mean you talk about being reborn? Do you mean that I've got to go back into my mother's womb to be reborn? Well, he looked at him like he would look at me probably and said, well, you big dummy. He said, don't you know that you can't go back into your mother's womb? When I'm talking to you about being reborn, I'm talking about being renewing of your mind, you see. And I could understand that. I could understand and accept that. And all this time, I said to myself by now, I want to know. I want to know if what they have been telling me is true or not. I want to know. And so I made a decision to go down to this church on that Sunday morning to those people that had been coming to me all that time. And I knew what they did down there on about 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, every Sunday morning. And I got there about 2 or 3 minutes to 11. I didn't want to get there too early. I might hear something that would help me, you see. So I got there about 2 or 3 minutes before 11, and I went into that church. And sure enough, they did that thing. They asked people to come down there to make this decision. And I went to that church that Sunday morning specifically to do what I'm getting ready to read for me. I made a decision that Sunday morning to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. So it says we were now at step 3. So I went down there and I said, God, I offer myself to you to build with me and to do with me as you will. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties that victory over them may bear witness to those that I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. And may I do your will always. So we thought well before taking this step, making sure that we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. See, I went down there with every intention of doing exactly that because I wanted to know if this thing was really, really true. And strange as it may seem to those that do not understand, and certainly I didn't, but my life from that day to this has been different. It's just like I was walking that way for 35 years of my life and turned around and started walking that way. Everything in my life has changed from that morning to this, and it continues to change as my years go by. My family has been reassembled. My wife and I finally got back together after 2.5 years of me being sober. We've got grandchildren today. They've never seen us drunk, thank God. Things are really good, and I'm living the very best life I've ever lived right now in my life. I'm living really good, and I know most of you are too, as a result of this third step in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a great thing.
The book says we thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could last abandon ourselves utterly to him. And I think the word utterly means completely, wholly, all the way, the complete ball of wax. I hope you don't make the same mistake that I did when I took step 3. Because I got down on my knees and I said, God, I offer myself to thee, with build with me and do with me as thou wilt, and so on and so on. But as I finished it up, I said, now this applies to my alcoholism. Don't fool with my sex life. And stay out of my money. Thank you, I can handle that all right. Well, I found out today God don't play those kind of games. He's not interested in just my alcoholism. As far as I know, he doesn't even drink, so why would he be interested in just the alcoholism? He wants the whole ball of wax. Now just think, if God could direct my thinking in all areas, then probably it would become better in all areas, and probably my actions and my life would become better in all areas. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Here I am, God, warts and all. Please direct my thinking so that I can have a better life in all areas of my life. That's what I'm really saying. Also, it says, we found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person, such as our wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor. It's long been known that prayer taken in connection with other human beings has a much, much deeper meaning and a deeper effect than it does if taken alone. They recognized this clear back in the Oxford groups. always their surrender step, their first step, our step 3, they took this in the company of other human beings. Now the book says it's better to meet God alone than one who might not understand. But I think if we can, it's better to take it with other human beings. And the only reason we don't is we're ashamed. I think we human beings are the funniest people, or we alcoholics are the funniest human beings in the world. We'll let our family see us every morning in the bathroom on our knees, hugging the porcelain bowl and puking our guts up. And we come to AA and we start trying to do something about our life, and we're embarrassed to let them see us pray. All human beings are born to live, really in 3 dimensions. If God lives within us, we're born to live with God. And if we're living here on earth, that means we're born to live with other human beings. And if we can take this prayer with another human being, for the first time we're trying to reassemble ourselves in the design that God intended in the first place, with God and with other human beings. The guys that I work with, that I sponsor, I insist they take it with me. 2 reasons. Number 1, if they take it with me, I know they have taken it. That's the only way I know for sure they've done step 3. But the real reason is every time we take it together, it has more depth and more meaning and becomes a stronger part of my life too. I think it's a very, very good idea.